Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission. It is Monday, October 11th, and we are here for a continuation of the hearing in docket 2021-88E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners first. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Powers, and Commissioner Belser. Virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Caston. Mr. Butler, I will recognize you to read the docket, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Other members of the commission, as you referred to, this is the continuation of docket number 2021-88E, Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated 2021 avoided cost proceeding. This is pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated Section 5841-20A. And Madam Chairman and other members of the commission, the docket is in order.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Council, at this time, I'm going to ask if y'all can log in and let's take appearances for the record. Appearing for Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Good morning, Commissioner Belzer, members of the commission. My name is Chad Burgess. I'm in-house corporate counsel for Dominion Energy South Carolina. And with me today is Matthew Gissendaner. He's also in-house corporate counsel. Mitchell Willoughby and Tracy Green are also here with me. They are the company's outside counsel. And it's a pleasure to appear before you today. And we look forward to presenting the remainder of the company's case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess, and welcome. Present for SC.
Madam Vice Chair, this is Richard Witt from the Witt Law Firm for Carolina's Clean Energy Business Association. With me, admitted pro hoc vici, is John Burns, who's the General Counsel of SC.
Thank you, Mr. Witt, and welcome. Johnson Development.
Good morning, Commissioner. This is Court Walsh for Johnson Development. Also representing Johnson Development in this matter is my partner, Weston Adams, who will be attending the hearing later. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, and welcome to you and Mr. Adams. South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
Yes, good morning. Roger Hall for the department. Also with me today is Connor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Welcome to you and Mr. Parker.
Thank you.
Pinegate Renewables.
Madam Vice Chair, Richard Witt from the Witt Law Firm for Pinegate.
And this is Bland Holman, Madam Vice Chair for Pinegate Renewables, and pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Witt and Mr. Holman. Welcome to the proceeding. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Madam Vice Chair. This is Chris Huber here for ORS, and I am joined by Alex Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Huber, and welcome to ORS. SACE and CCL, I'm sorry I missed you earlier. Excuse me.
No worries. Good morning, Vice Chair Belzer. This is Emma Clancy appearing on behalf of South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Good
Thank
to
you.
be here today.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy, and welcome to you and your client as well. Did I get all the parties? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any preliminary matters that we need to address this morning?
Madam Vice Chair, this is Chris Huber for ORS. We had one brief preliminary matter we'd like to take up.
Go ahead, Mr. Huber.
ORS was simply like the state. Of course, one of the major issues before the commission with this hearing is the London Economics Report. We simply like to state that while ORS does not agree with everything in the London Economics Report, we are willing to accept that report as a compromise with the issues in this proceeding. We may have some clarifying questions on cross for London Economics, but that will all kind of depend on what others ask. But we want to just state that at the outset.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Any other matters?
Yes, Vice Chair Belzer, this is Emma Clancy. I do have one preliminary matter to raise. As of Friday, SACE and CCL have a motion pending before the commission requesting that the responsive testimony of Kenneth Searcy be accepted as timely filed. As noted in the motion, our filing was delayed due to a calendaring error. But once we were made aware of the noon deadline, we immediately reached out to the hearing officer, other parties, and filed the responsive testimony as quickly as possible. We do have Mr. Searcy available to present his testimony, which we think will be useful to the commission in its review of the LEI report. And at this point, we would respectfully request that the commission grant our motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy. Do any of the party, do any of the parties wish to respond?
Vice Chair Belzer, this is Chad Burgess for Dominion Energy South Carolina. We have no objection to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Any other parties wish to respond? Hearing none.
Vice Chair, this is Chris Huber for ORS. We do not object to the motion either.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Hearing no objection, Ms. Clancy, your motion will be granted.
Thank you very much.
Anything further before we begin with taking witnesses? Okay, I think our procedure will be, we will ask Mr. David to take the stand first for limited cross-examination that is continued from the prior hearing date. And then we will have SECIBA's limited surrebuttal to that. And then we will hear from Mr. Golding, the third-party independent expert. And following that, we'll hear the responsive testimonies to the LEI report. Any questions about our procedure? Hearing none, Mr. Burgess, I'd ask that y'all call Mr. David to the stand, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. This is Mitchell Willoughby.
Thanks.
I'll be correcting or working with Mr. David. So Mr. David is on the screen. He's under oath from the previous hearing, but I'll leave it up to the chair whether you wish to re-administer the oath.
I think since there's been a passage of time, Mr. Willoughby, that we'll go ahead and re-swear witnesses that were previously sworn. So
thank you. Mr. David is available.
Sorry about that. If you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. David. I think at this time we will recognize counsel for SECIBA to go ahead with their limited cross-examination.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is John Burns for SECIBA for the reporter's benefit. I just have a few very short questions for Mr. David at this time. Mr. David, aside from the changes made to your testimony, your direct testimony regarding hourly weighting, which I believe you originally intended to use and then decided not to, you also made a change to your rebuttal testimony related to an incorrect reference to a discovery response. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that change specifically had to do with a reference to a discovery response that you identified or misidentified as being found in ORS 1-4.
Correct.
But it should have referenced SECIBA 2-14. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
In your rebuttal testimony on page 10, lines 5 through 7, let me share my screen and ask the Vice Chair if she can see that.
We can see that. Can the witness see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Can you read it?
This is, pardon me?
Is it readable, Mr. David?
Yes, I can read it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is your rebuttal testimony as originally filed, and you'll see that it includes the on line 1, the ORS request for records 1-4. Is that the entry that you corrected?
Yes, that is.
And you state that the work papers provided in response to that request, which would corrected would be CCBA 2-14, show DESC carrying available operating reserves in significant excess of the baseline 250 megawatt requirement in most hours. The cost to integrate solar capacity for each tranche is driven by the need to increase available operating reserves in the relatively small number of hours in which the company does not carry an excess in the baseline scenario. Your change from ORS request 1.4 to CCBA request 2.14 doesn't change that testimony, does it?
No, it does not.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions at this time, but I'm sure I'll be talking to you on your other testimony responsive to LEI. Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
I will stop sharing as soon as I can figure out how to do it, Madam Chair.
Well, you've done it here, I think.
There we go. Thank you.
Mr. Willoughby, do you have any redirect?
Yes, in fact, Mr. Burns, could I ask you to put that, share your screen again and put that testimony, the rebuttal testimony that you had highlighted back on the screen? Perfect. Thank you very much. On that very point, Mr. David, the underlying baseline 250 megawatt requirement is what the company uses in most hours. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Would you, in further answer to Mr. Burns's question, would you explain to the commission and the parties what the cost to integrate solar capacity for each tranche, what the differentiation is between the 250 megawatt requirement in most hours and the increased operating reserves?
Madam Chair, if I may be heard briefly in objection.
Go ahead, Mr. Burns.
My cross was limited solely to confirming Mr. David's replacement of the 214.14 did not affect his testimony. I think what we're getting here is sir rebuttal, which the chairman explicitly denied DESC the opportunity to do. Mr. Burgess will have some testimony related to the changes that Mr. David made, but all I was doing was confirming the change, and we'll go to Mr. Burgess's testimony after that. So I would object to continuing testimony from Mr. David, since we didn't open the door to any of explanations that he had the opportunity to make in his original testimony.
Mr. Willoughby?
And Madam Chair, the testimony is directly on the screen, the very same testimony that Mr. Burns made inquiry about. And all I've got is one question of Mr. David, and that is to explain the 250 megawatt requirement in most hours and what that language translates into his tranche 1, tranche 2 analysis. One question, one answer.
Mr. Burns, I'm going to allow this one brief question. Mr. Willoughby, let's not go too far, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. David, would you explain the significance of that quote that Mr. Burns called to our attention?
Yes, sir, I can. So when we say that there is a baseline requirement of 250 megawatts of operating reserves, that is the minimum requirement. That does not necessarily relate to the amount of available operating reserves at any given hour, which are, as I say right here, and as I displayed in the data that was made available to all parties, are in most hours significantly in excess of that minimum requirement. So the point here is that as I've stated, the variable integration charge for each of these tranches is driven by the need to increase the minimum operating reserve requirement. And the minimum operating reserve requirement being increased is only causing the available operating reserves to be increased in a relatively small number of hours where the available operating reserves were not already in significant excess of that 250 megawatt minimum.
And is it this increase in operating reserves in those relatively small number of hours the driver of the cost increase for having firm operating reserves available when needed.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Thank you very much, Mr. David. That's all my redirect, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. I think that will conclude Mr. David's testimony this morning. Mr. David, you may stand down.
Thank you.
Mr. Witt or Mr. Burns, would you present your next witness, please, for the supplemental sir rebuttal testimony?
Yes, Madam Chair. CCBA calls Ed Burgess. Mr. Burgess was previously under oath, but just as you just did, I suppose we should probably put him under oath again.
Yes, sir. Mr. Burgess, would you please let the court reporter swear you in this morning?
Mr. Burgess, if you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Can you hear me okay as we get started?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. And I assume, based upon the fact that you've just been sworn in, you are the same Ed Burgess who previously testified on behalf of CCBA in the earlier hearings in this matter?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared in this matter supplemental sir rebuttal testimony in response to the testimony of Mr. David, consisting of 12 pages?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that prepared testimony as previously prepared?
Not at this time.
If I asked you the questions in that supplemental sir rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same as previously filed?
Yes.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to move Mr. Burgess's supplemental sir rebuttal testimony into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Burgess's supplemental sir rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Mr. Burgess, did you prepare a summary of your supplemental sir rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Please present your summary to the commission.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, commissioners. In my supplemental sir rebuttal testimony, I provide a response to Mr. David's corrected rebuttal testimony. My key findings can be summarized as follows. Number one, Mr. David's corrections include a very significant changes pertaining to A, his methodology and the use of hourly weighting for determining the amount of integration costs attributable to solar, and B, the incorrect reference to an Excel workbook that fundamentally changes my understanding of his rebuttal testimony. Number two, regarding the hourly weighting, I maintain my position in opening testimony that hourly weighting is essential to accurately capture the impact of solar variability on DESC's system. This is because the maximum solar forecast error, that is the potential solar drop and corresponding integration costs, is not equal during both evening hours and midday hours. This was one of the corrections among others that I applied in my alternative VIC calculation. If only the hourly weighting were applied, it would lead to a VIC of less than half of DESC's proposal, that is 73 cents per megawatt hour rather than $1.80 per megawatt hour. Regarding the corrected Excel workbook reference, this correction improves my understanding of Guidehouse's analysis and reinforces my determination that the VIC has not been justified for tranche 1 and appears highly exaggerated for the other tranches. The workbook referenced in the correction contains calculations used to justify the need for a VIC in the first place. There are at least 4 fundamental problems with these calculations, which I address in detail in my supplemental testimony. The 4 problems I discuss are: first, the absence of geographic diversity, which results in prediction of higher overall solar variability than is justified. B, second, the arbitrary exclusion of Fairfield pumped hydro is a significant source of potential operating reserves during critical times, thus raising the supposed integration cost for solar beyond what they would be in reality. Third, the assumed level of magnitude for a solar drop is unsupported by any actual analysis clearly documented in the VIC study. Fourth, the maximum shortfall in operating reserves shown in Guidehouse's 10-year business as usual forecast, that is the forecast with no new reserves, is significantly less, and thus integration costs are less than what Guidehouse says must be added to accommodate solar. Correcting just one of these four issues could eliminate the identified need for a VIC entirely for tranche one and could likely reduce or eliminate it for additional tranches as well. That concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Madam Chair, Mr. Burgess is now available for cross-examination from interested parties.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Johnson Development Associates.
Madam Chair, this is Court Walsh for Johnson Development. We don't have any questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Pine Gate Renewables.
I'm sorry, this is Bland Holman for Pine Gate Renewables. I'm sorry, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolina Clean Energy Business Association.
Madam Chair, this is John Burns.
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Burgess
this is
our
your
witness,
witness. I apologize.
I'll be happy to cross him, but I'm
No,
sure
no.
he wouldn't appreciate it.
I'm looking at two different lists here, so bear with me. I apologize. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. We have no questions for this witness. And normally, under the rules, ORS goes last on crossing. We have no questions for this witness. We would respectfully ask if we could go last for the remaining witnesses.
I think the reg says ordinarily, right?
Yes, that's correct, Madam Vice Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Dominion Energy.
Madam Chair, I do have just a couple of questions, and in response to what Mr. River just indicated is I believe the company would be permitted to go last where it would be a witness that would be not the company's witness, but we can address that later. Good morning, Mr. Burgess. How are you today?
Good morning, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, and just for the record, my name is Mitchell Willoughby, and I work with Dominion Energy South Carolina. And I think you and I talked at the original hearing back in mid-August, did we not?
Yes, we did.
And would it be true while you filed supplemental testimony related to the corrections that Mr. David made to his testimony, the recommendations that you include in your supplemental testimony were the same recommendations that you had made in your original testimony? Isn't that correct?
Yeah, by and large, the recommendations were similar. I think I expanded upon them in some respects, but largely they were similar.
And would it be true that I think we had this conversation initially when you were testifying, you have done no production modeling in an effort to try to identify what the level of the company's VIC might be.
We did not do our own production cost modeling, although we utilized the production cost modeling that the company did and used the results of that to calculate an alternative VIC.
So what you've done is taken the information that's been developed by Guidehouse and Mr. David and basically provided your different analysis or different views or critiques of the work that they've done, correct?
Right. So the analysis that was done, so we performed our own analysis on the the detailed results of the production cost model. So going through the thousands of lines of the spreadsheets that came out of that and performing our own calculations on those. And so we included that, as part of our work papers and looking at both the issue of first, whether or not, the need for a VIC is justified. And then secondly, giving the benefit of the doubt that there would be one, then, what would the correct level of the VIC be based on those model results?
And you had the opportunity before you testified in mid-August to perform your own modeling, and you chose not to do that. And what I'm hearing you say is that between the hearing in mid-August and the reconvened hearing today, you again have chosen not to do your own modeling, right?
I wouldn't characterize it quite like that. As I think we've heard in the last portion of this hearing, Dominion's in a unique position to do, some of this type of modeling. If we were able to, perform those model runs in the same capacity, then I think we would have done so. But, in short of that, I think we, provided a very thorough technical analysis that utilized a lot of the same modeling approaches that Dominion did.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burgess. It is true that basically you talk about 3 changes that Mr. David made. Let's see if I can share my screen here. See if this works. Can you see that, Mr. Burgess?
Yeah, it's a little small, but I think I can just make it out.
Let's see if I can make it a little larger. Is that a little better?
Yeah, it's a little better.
So I'm trying to figure out how to scroll this thing up and down.
Mr. Willoughby, can you enlarge that a little bit? We're having.
But when I do, it takes away some of the headers.
Mr. Mr. Burgess, can you read that?
I think I can. Yeah. Looks okay to me, but I don't know if.
Yeah, and it's a very, very easy point that I'm making in this document. The heading says original text, original location, new text, new location. This makes reference directly to the corrections that Mr. David made in his testimony. And essentially all 3, while you talk about 3 changes that he made, the effect of all 3 of these changes deal with one issue, and that is the issue of whether or not weighted by hourly solar production was used, or whether weighted by whether or not solar is generating in each case is used. Isn't that right?
So I guess, yeah, so the 3 corrections in the direct testimony, which there was another correction in the rebuttal, but these 3 in the direct relate to that hourly weighting issue, which, as I just mentioned in my summary, this is a pretty significant change, in terms of, what was presented in the VIC study versus what, I guess, later was modified to do this. And, I wouldn't characterize it as sort of a minor issue either, as I mentioned in my summary. I mean, this could potentially reduce the VIC by more than half.
No, and I didn't say that it was a minor issue. I just said it was the same issue. The correction was made in several places, and it addressed the same issue for each correction, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree with that. And the only other issue, and we discussed both of these, was the fact that Mr. David had made reference to some workbooks in response to, I think, ORS requests. And then he changed that reference or corrected that reference to make it clear that he was actually referring to a workbook that in response to a SECIVA interrogatory request to produce, and I think that was 2-14 or something like that. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, he changed the reference to a workbook, which, you know, again, didn't see that as sort of a minor issue, since that reference, you know, it was one set of workbooks that were, you know, one critical piece of the VIC calculation versus a whole nother set of workbooks, you know, 6 in total, I believe, that were another core piece of the VIC analysis. And so, you know, that's a pretty major shift and, you know, really changed my, you know, understanding of what his testimony was trying to say in that context.
And again, I didn't suggest or say that it was a minor correction, but that correction actually had been identified by you as because of the reference that you had identified that it did not seem to be an accurate reference. So you had mentioned that in your rebuttal testimony, had you not?
Right. Yeah, I was confused by the reference because it didn't make any sort of logical sense in that context, and the things that were being referred to weren't actually contained within the workbook in the original reference. So with the change, you know, there was, you know, it made more sense in that context, but changed the meaning and the sort of interpretation that, you know, would result. And so my original rebuttal addressed the sort of disconnect between the reference and what was being said. And then in the supplement I provided, I was able to go further in terms of actually interpreting what Mr. David was trying to say and confirming, you know, some of my original points in direct testimony.
And after doing the analysis and after the court reviewing in detail over the last nearly 2 months, your recommendations here today in your supplemental testimony remain largely the same as what you had recommended back in your both direct and rebuttal testimony, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burgess. Those are all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. Commissioners? Commissioners, any questions for the witness? Commissioner Caston.
Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I want to make sure I understood and heard everything correctly. Did I understand in your response to a question by Mr. Willoughby that you did not model, I guess, generation reserve or BIC needs, but used existing information from the study, the Guidehouse study? Is that correct?
Right. So we use the same model results that Guidehouse produced in looking at both, you know, the question of what level of reserves might need to be added, and then also the alternative VIC calculation that we provided. And so it would be, you know, equivalent to as if we had done the modeling ourselves. We simply used models results that were already available and uses that as a starting point. Not to say that we would have done the modeling in the exact same way, if we had been given the opportunity, but, I think that you can look at that as if we had done our own modeling too.
Okay. Does the growth of solar on Dominion's system increase the need for generation reserves in the VIC?
Eventually, I believe so. I think that as I have made clear, I think that, there's a fair bit of headroom in a lot of instances, where you wouldn't necessarily need to increase it, or at least not increase it during most hours of the year. Eventually you get to a point where you probably would have to increase it. And then, and that's when, you start to, I think, look at integration, driver of integration costs.
So if I understood your rebuttal, and I guess your previous testimony, did I understand it correctly in that you do not believe that there is a need for additional generation reserve due to solar or a variable integration charge at this time?
When you're looking at tranche one, I believe the answer to that is yes. And also I believe that's true, largely true for tranche two as well. I think that once you start getting into higher levels, you may start to see that. But that's correct. And, if you look at what actually Guidehouse modeled, and, they looked at the highest, level of reserves being needed during any single hour in the next 10 years as being, 151 megawatts of shortfall is I believe what they identified. And yet, they didn't actually include things like, the Fairfield Pump Hydro, which could provide potentially 576 megawatts of reserves, right? So if you factor that in, there's no need for an increase. Or if you look at the current operating practice that they have of holding 40% of solar reserves, you apply that instead of what Guidehouse has recommended, then there's also no need. So, under these sort of corrected model assumptions, then you would see that in fact, there's sufficient reserves during all those hours that they modeled over a 10-year period.
At what point then, you say down the road some, at what point do you believe they would need additional reserve generation and a variable integration charge?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's hard to put a precise number on it, but I think it's probably, at least a few years out, and it partly depends on, how much additional solar comes onto the system at what point in time. But, I think certainly the tranche one, it seems sufficient for now. And like I said, tranche two is largely there. And then, maybe when you start to get into tranche three, or, that's when you might want to take a look at it.
Then to really know, would not a more detailed model need to be performed or ran rather than, just somewhere down the road?
Right. So I think, what I've heard in this hearing is that there's an intent to try to do this additional independent integration study, which may take, 9 months to a year by some estimates. So, let's call it a year. I mean, I think that point, assuming, that is taken up sooner rather than later and, could be done in, close to a year from now, I think then, that will give you a good indication, I think, of when that VIC charge needs to be implemented. But, at the same time, you don't need to wait for that to be completed to I think, look at what information we have now and make a decision on, fixing a VIC, at least until that time.
Thank you very much. No more questions, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Any other commissioners with questions for this witness? Hearing none. Mr. Burns, any redirect?
Waiting for my microphone to kick on. No redirect from CCBO.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Burgess, thank you for your testimony this morning. You may stand down. I think you've pre-filed some testimony for later, but thank you for that this morning.
Thank you very much.
I believe that concludes the leftover testimony of limited cross on rebuttal and the supplemental rebuttal. And so we will move on to the testimony from London Economics. Mr. Goulding, are you on the line?
Yes, Commissioner, I am here.
Good morning, Mr. Goulding. Thank you for being here. Please allow the court reporter to administer the oath, please.
Mr. Goulding, if you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I so affirm.
Thank you.
Mr. Goulding, you were retained as the third-party independent expert pursuant to the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act, also known as Act 62, and you were retained by the Commission. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you have prepared a report, I think designated as the independent third-party consultant final report. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that was submitted and filed on the docket management system and provided to the parties. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you have any additions, changes, or corrections to make to that report?
No, I do not.
Okay. As the Commission can rely upon materials in that report pursuant to the statute, we will mark that report as the next hearing exhibit, which I believe is hearing exhibit 13, and enter that report into the evidence of this case. Mr. Goulding, do you have a summary, or can you tell us before we get into questions from the parties, can you tell us about your report, please?
Certainly. So I'm going to focus on page 73 of our report, which provided our overall opinion of the avoided cost proceeding. Over the course of our work, we reviewed the application, the testimony, related filings, and work papers that were submitted. And we developed a series of recommendations. For the avoided capacity cost calculations, we recommend avoided capacity cost rates of $81.99 per kilowatt year, or 30.30367 cents per kilowatt hour. And we came to those conclusions by looking at the proposed rates and incorporating matching the size of the capacity change and the size of the generator, using EIA-based cost assumptions for an AeroCT, and inclusion of a 1.05 performance adjustment factor, We also presented on page 37 a series of intervening steps that would allow the commission, if they chose, to look at lower numbers that would be based on making one or more of our proposed adjustments. With regards to technology neutrality and seasonal allocations, we recommended the use of a single avoided capacity rate. While we recommended that in future proceedings, there be further discussion of why no value should be attributed to the summer period, that for the current proceeding, that the proposed seasonal allocation be accepted. With regards to the avoided energy cost calculations, LEI ran independent modeling exercise to determine whether it could replicate results within a reasonable range of error. We found that we could, and thus we recommend that DESC's proposed PR1 and standard offer non-solar QF energy rates be adopted. We explored the derivation of the gas price outlook and found that that outlook was within a reasonable range of potential outcomes. We looked at the standard offer non-solar energy pricing periods and believe that those are sufficient for the purposes of this proceeding. However, we also recommended that the energy rate be technology neutral rather than separate rates for standalone solar QFs. With regards to the VIC and the mitigation protocol, we believe that the appropriate approach would be to continue with the interim level at 96 cents per megawatt hour, subject to true up based on the results of a comprehensive independent study. On page 55, we present some of the issues that we think that study should include, including examination of the impact of DESC's proposed peaking turbine modernization program, the potential, if any, for additional demand response resources, the way in which the proposed SEEM could be designed to minimize VIC. I would note that we don't state anywhere that as currently designed that it does or will. The role of battery storage and the extent to which investment in modifications to existing must-run units to further increase flexibility would provide benefits to ratepayers. We also note that if the Commission believes that it is statutorily required to fix the VIC, that the proposed VIC of $1.80 per megawatt hour would be a reasonable value. However, emphasizing that our preference is that the 96-cent rate be maintained and the results of the independent study used to inform the fixed rate. With regards to the calculation methodology for the mitigation protocol, we agree with DESC's proposed mitigation protocol as long as the modifications that the company noted in Mr. Bell's rebuttal testimony are incorporated, which include calculating variability relative to forecast rather than actual, and allowing solar facility owners to aggregate production data from across QFs that they own. We note that to the extent that the production meter recording generation for qualifying facility is capable of providing necessary data, that additional meter should not be required. Also, with regards to the deadline for submissions, we recommend that the two business day, requirement proposed by DESC be adopted. We had concerns about the so-called two-strike disqualification provision and noted that while timely submission is important, there are other ways to incentivize that proper behavior. With regards to the standard offer and form PPA, we recommended that with regards to the timing of certificate delivery to ensure consistency throughout the standard offer and the form PPA, Section 1 of Attachment D be approved as proposed by DESC, and that Section 9.1 of the PPA be amended to reflect the proposed 20-day requirement. With regards to insurance coverage amounts, we recommended that these in the standard offer PPA be maintained at current levels, and that the proposed higher coverage amounts be approved only for the form PPA. We also recommended that the Commission adopt the form of surety bond as proposed by DESC. With regards to the NOC form, we believe that the original language pertaining to site control should be maintained, that no changes be made. So that's I recognize a very high level summary of our report and our recommendations, but I hope it suffices to commence the conversation.
Mr. Golding, thank you for that summary. I do want to clarify with regard to what has been entered into evidence as hearing Exhibit 13, that is the corrected report that I believe was submitted on September 22nd, and that corrected report just had some changes to, I believe it was figures 13 and 15, and just
figures 13 to 15, so 13, 14, and 15.
Okay, thank you. I just want to put that on the record so that the parties are aware of the which report or which version is in the record. Thank you. Thank you for that summary. Get back to my list here. Johnson Development Associates, any cross-examination, please?
Chair Court Walsh for Johnson Development, no questions.
Thank you. South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
Yes, Vice Chair Belzer, we do have a few questions. Thank you. Good afternoon. Is it Goulding or Golding?
I answer to both, so don't worry about it.
Okay, well, appreciate it. My name is Roger Hall. I'm an attorney with the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs. Hope you're doing well today.
Yes, I am, and I hope you are as well.
I am. Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So bear with me just a minute. So hopefully what you're seeing is just the cover page of your report. Can you see that okay for now?
I can, yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn to page 28 of the report. And at the bottom of that page, you quote Dominion Energy South Carolina as calculating their avoided capacity cost as the incremental capital investment related revenue required to support its resource plan. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And on page 29, I'll scroll here, you note that the company estimated that annual avoided capacity costs as being $58.81 per kilowatt year. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
We're going to keep scrolling to page 37 of your report.
Yes.
And here you list the incremental impact of 3 changes to the company's calculations of avoided capacity costs. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I'll try to increase that just a little bit. And the ultimate impact of those 3 changes is an estimated capacity cost of $81.99 per kilowatt year. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's roughly 39.4% greater than the company's original estimate, correct?
That's correct.
Good. Scroll now to page 81 of your report. I believe this shows just some parts of the country and Canada where LEI has done work. Is that correct?
That focuses solely on regulatory and policy engagements.
Okay.
You know, we've worked across North America and around the world on a range of issues associated with power markets.
Okay, but so here it shows, you know, southern states of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, some mid-Atlantic states, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Would you say that you're generally familiar with the operations of MISO and PJM that operate in those regions?
Yes.
Okay. And in those regions, MISO and PJM operate an organized capacity market called BRA, or Base Residual Auction for PJM, and Planning Resource Auction, or PRA, in MISO. Is that correct?
That's correct. The market rules in the two jurisdictions are quite different because the underlying structure of the individual states are different. But yes, that's correct.
Okay. And are you familiar with the concept of cone, or cost of new entry analysis, that are done in those regions?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm going to try to share my screen one more time. Okay, hopefully, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, so what this is has been pre-marked as DCA's Cross Exhibit 1. This is the cover page, but what I'm going to show you is the executive summary of a report on the cost of new combustion turbines and combined cycle plants in PJM, prepared in April 2018.
Thank you.
I'm going to scroll down to Roman numeral 3, page Roman numeral 3, and here the report states that cone represents the total annual net revenue, net of variable operating cost, that a new generation resource would need to recover its capacity investment and fixed costs, given reasonable expectations about future cost recovery over its economic life. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So effectively, a cone analysis estimates the annual net revenue requirement needed to recover the fixed capital investment over the economic life of a new generation facility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you agree that this is similar to how the company estimated its avoided capacity costs in this matter?
Yes, I would.
I'm going to turn to page 7 of DCA Cross Exhibit 1. Bear with me. So this is table ES2, the estimated combustion turbine cone analysis for 2020, for the year 2022-2023. And I want to just focus on, for now, the kind of two lines at the bottom and then dark blue there. Do you see those?
Yes. The one, that say levelized cone, dollars per megawatt year and dollars per megawatt day. Is that what you'd like me to focus on?
Yes, that's correct. And so what these show are the cone analysis done for those years. Do you see that it was estimated for PJM to range from $98,200 per megawatt year to $108,400 per megawatt year?
I do.
And that would be roughly $98.20 per kilowatt year and $108.40 per kilowatt year, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And below that is the daily value of this price range, so which range from $269 per megawatt day to $297 per megawatt day. Do you see that? Try to increase it a little bit for you.
The reason that I'm hesitating, what I see is 269 to 297. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And would you agree that shows with the price per megawatt day of the cone analysis for PJM?
Correct.
Okay. Madam Vice Chair, I'd move to have DCA Cross Exhibit 1 entered as the next hearing exhibit, please.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Willoughby?
I would object to the introduction. I mean, this witness did not prepare. I will withdraw the objection.
Okay. SCDCA Cross Exhibit 1 will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 14 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Goulding, I'm going to attempt to share my screen one more time. And I might need to increase this a little bit, but for now, I'll just represent that this is an exhibit that's been pre-marked as DCA Cross Exhibit 2. It is a summary of the results of the base residual auction conducted by PJM for the 2022-2023 delivery year. And let me go ahead and just, for your sake and the commission's, try to blow this up a little bit. Can you see that blue box at the bottom?
Yes, I can.
And this is, as it's labeled, are the BRA resource clearing prices for 2022-2023. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And would you agree that those prices represent the actual sales prices from the auctions of capacity credits for PJM?
Yes, I do.
And
Mr. Hall,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you enlarge that a little bit, please?
Yes, I'll certainly try.
Thank you. That's a little better.
Okay. So again, these are the actual sales prices for capacity auctions of capacity credits in PJM, and these range from $50 per megawatt day to $126.50 per megawatt day. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And would you agree that these values are about 20 to 40% of the cone price estimates that we just discussed?
Subject to check, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair Belzer, I'd move to have DCA Cross Exhibit 2 entered as the next hearing exhibit, please.
Any objection? Hearing none. SCDCA Cross Exhibit 2 will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 15 and entered into the record of this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goulding, one or two more times here. Let's see if I can. This. So before, now what I put on the screen is pre-marked as DCA Cross Exhibit 3. This is an excerpt from MISO's summary of their results of the most recent planning resource auction, which again are the actual clearing prices for the capacity credits. Do you see at the very bottom row the estimates of cost of new entry?
I do.
Okay. And these range from $228.55 per megawatt day in Zone 10, which is Mississippi, to $266.68 per megawatt day in Zone 5, Missouri. Do you see those?
I do.
And subject to check, would you agree that this is equivalent to approximately $83.42 per kilowatt year to up to $94.80 per kilowatt year?
I would have to do the calculations.
Yeah, I understand. Again, subject to check, they range from 83.42 to 94.80 kilowatt per year. And that's roughly what you calculated in your report for avoided capacity cost for DESC, especially that Zone 10 Mississippi value. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And if you look at the upper part of this page, this shows the actual clearing prices for the most recent PRA. And do you agree that the clearing prices for the 2021-2022, which is the sort of bottom line of that area of that chart, range from 1 cent per megawatt hour per day to $5 per megawatt day?
Well, I have a bit of a concern about presenting these as being equivalent to what could be achieved in the Dominion territory And also, I do think it's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison. I agree with you that this is what was cleared in MISO. And I just want to make a few observations there. First, when we think about the structure of capacity mechanisms, what we see is that because PJM contains a greater number of states that have liberalized competitive wholesale markets, the dynamics of the PJM market are quite a bit different from MISO. And I think that the PJM capacity mechanism, although subject to a great deal of controversy, does show the benefit of having larger market areas and competition among resources. MISO is a little bit different. It has a number of vertically integrated utilities similar to DESC. But I believe that when we think about how DESC is applying these numbers, that these numbers are based on subject to reliability planning, just-in-time addition of capacity, which means that it's added when it's needed and it costs what it costs. Whereas when we think about the PJM market, for example, where you're looking just at a one-year auction, 3 years out, you're looking at incorporating diversity of resources across a much wider geographic area. Ultimately, I don't believe that we're really talking about the same construct. So I appreciate that the numbers from PJM and MISO are useful in thinking about the value of capacity over a broader area in an organized market construct, but that's not really what we have here with DESC.
But you would agree that many organized markets that have structured capacity, markets do trade at prices well below cone prices, correct?
Yes, but I think you also have to look at existing reserve margins and the overall structure of those markets. They do trade below cone, but the reason that they trade below cone is that they're at different points in their capacity need, and that there are a number of different participants with different needs that are participating in the market. So I think one would want to be cautious about drawing analogies from these organized markets to a small geographic area that is operated under a traditional vertically integrated construct.
Okay, fair enough. And just to confirm, though, LEI did not analyze a market-based estimate of capacity costs in Dominion service territory, did it?
That's correct. We did not, because no such market exists.
Are you familiar with the Southeast Energy Exchange Market, or SEAM?
I am familiar with the proposal. The market itself obviously does not exist, and the application is still under consideration at FERC.
And just to confirm, it is a proposal currently before FERC to create an integrated energy exchange market similar to that in organized RTO markets for states in the Southeast, correct?
Well, I would argue that it is not, in fact, similar. It is a very, very early stage. It's probably not appropriate to call it a pilot, because the intention is that it continues. But it does not consist of many of the features of the organized market. The best analogy is really the energy imbalance market out west. But SEEM, as I understand it, it would not include all of the features of EIM. It's a starting point. It's a toe in the water. And I understand that there is substantial interaction between stakeholders about whether more can or should be done more quickly.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to try one more time to share my screen here. This is page 35. I'm sorry, before I do that, Vice Chair Belzer, I've moved to have DCA Cross Exhibit 3 entered as the next hearing exhibit.
Any objection to Cross Exhibit 3 being entered? Hearing none. SC DCA Cross Exhibit 3 will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 16 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you. Okay, so now, Mr. Goulding, I believe you should be able to see page 35 of the London Economics Report on the screen. And at the top, the box at the top of the page, you will present your opinion on the proposed application of a performance adjustment factor, or PAF. You see this?
I do.
Okay. And in this box, I don't think we need to read it word for word, but you say that you agree with CCL witness Cersei that a PAF should be included in calculating avoided capacity costs, as doing so would put QFs on a more equal footing with utility-owned resources, as DESC's own resources are compensated for periods of unavailability. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you analyzed the availability factor of DESC's resources?
So our focus in response to this was actually to look at the availability factor of new peaking plants. And we have recommended that as part of a future filing, that there be a greater focus on the availability of DESC's own plants.
Okay. So you have not analyzed the availability factor of QFs on Dominion's system relative to Dominion's resources?
So with regards to QFs, when we think about the avoided costs, we believe the focus should be on the utilities fleet, not on the availability factors of the QFs. In addition, I would point out that based on the structure that we've put forth, if a QF has really lousy availability, they're not going to get paid. But that's really not relevant to our calculation of the costs that the utility avoids. In other words, when we think about avoided capacity, we're looking at the costs of a peaker. That peaker, if it's built by the utility receives its payment of its fixed costs, and we can expect that the utility is going to run according to prudent utility practices. And what we've tended to see is that new peakers will have availability of 95% or higher. And we think that if there were a study before the next avoided cost hearing and they said, you know what, our peakers are actually at 98%, then we say, okay, well, the PAF should be lower. But the 1.05 is, we think, reasonable because it is based on a hypothetical peaking plant that is similar to what's used in the calculations.
Well, you say it's based on hypothetical, but I believe your report says you recommend the 1.05 because that's what was used in Duke's avoided cost hearing. Is that correct?
While that is correct, I believe there's also language let's go back to that text box.
Sure. I can share it for you if you like.
Yeah, let's because otherwise I have to flip through my, my paper here. Let's just see what it says.
Sure.
So, we say, both that it's based on the PAF included in Duke's, 2019 avoided cost exceeding, but we also say it's consistent with the outage rates for peaking plants. I think we probably should have said for newer peaking plants. So I do believe that we covered both, of those, justifications.
Okay, and right, you say it's typical that 95% factor is typical. Did you provide any documentation to support that?
We did not, but we are quite confident that we can do so. Indeed, I believe we have an IR that we're responding to that has that information.
Okay, and just to confirm, did you analyze the availability factor of Duke's generation resources relative to Dominion's?
No, because we believe from our own industry experience that the 1.05 is reasonable and representative of the performance of newer peaking plants.
I believe you said earlier that new peakers is typically 95% or higher.
Correct.
So Dominion's could be 97%, 98,
Could be, and that's why we recommend that there be some evidence submitted about Dominion's own performance. The databases that are publicly available have a lag, so they wouldn't have the newest peakers. So we think that in subsequent filings, having actual evidence of new peakers from PSC system would help to inform the level of the PAF.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Carolina Clean Energy's Business Association.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is John Burns for CCEVA. I do have a few questions. Sir, thank you for your time today. I wanted to direct your attention to a few parts of the LEI report. First of all, in your LEI's analysis of Mr. Burgess's testimony, in response to our request for, hold on a second, make sure I'm looking at the right page. I am. CCEVA sent some requests for information and interrogatories to LEI. Do you recall those requests?
I do.
In response to the second one of those requests, LEI states that its review of work papers provided in response to CCEVA interrogatories served on Dominion was sufficient for it to reach the conclusion that an independent study was necessary. Is that right?
That's correct.
And LEI indicated in subsequent responses to CCEVA interrogatories that it did not actually analyze any of the analysis performed by witness Burgess, correct?
That's correct.
And you concluded that the quote, and I'm quoting from page 54 of your report in section 5.3, concluded that the extent of contrary evidence introduced regarding the Guidehouse Vic analysis supports the need for a truly independent study, correct?
That's correct.
Did you review the testimony and report filed by witness Ori on behalf of ORS?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Ori, in his written testimony, and please, if you need me to call any of this testimony up, I think I can do that pretty quickly. So if ever you're confused as to what I'm referring to, please ask me, I'll call it up. But if we can just talk about it, we can avoid the delay of the sharing the screen if possible. But in Mr. Ori's written testimony, he concluded that, quote, Guidehouse has not justified their forecast of incremental operating reserves needed to accommodate solar forecast uncertainty. Do you recall that testimony from Mr. Ori?
I do.
And he recommended in his written testimony that this commission retain the current interim VIC of 96 cents per megawatt hour. Do you recall that to be trued up?
I do.
After an independent integration study was conducted, it would be trued up under commission authority, correct?
Correct.
And then when Mr. Ori recommended that if the commission were to fix the VIC in this proceeding, it should be set at $1.80 per megawatt hour. He made that recommendation from the stand during commissioner questions. Do you recall that?
I do.
That was not part of his written testimony that you reviewed, was it?
Correct.
And there was no quantitative analysis presented in his testimony that yielded $1.80 VIC, was there?
No, there was not.
And as a result, no party had the opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Ori on this point since the recommendation was made during the commissioner's questioning process. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Is LEI aware, or are you aware of any detailed analysis conducted by witness Ori with regard to witness Burgess's analysis of the Guidehouse study?
I am not.
So neither London Economics nor Mr. Ori reviewed in detail the analysis conducted by witness Burgess to determine the need for any incremental operating reserves and the resulting VIC. Is that right?
That's correct.
And neither LEI nor witness Ori concluded that Guidehouse had justified its forecast of incremental operating reserves needed to accommodate solar uncertainty, has it? Did they?
So I'd like to present a slightly more nuanced response to that, and I realize that that's not always what folks are looking for. I have concerns about some aspects of the Guidehouse work, and I have some concerns about some of the assertions that Mr. Burgess makes. And because I have concerns about both, that is what led me to believe that doing a fully independent study that included input from all stakeholders with regards to development of assumptions and scenarios, particularly about the back end of the Guidehouse forecast, would be most useful to inform the development of a VIC. So with regards to the 180, I believe it would be too strong a statement for me to say that I believe that there is no supporting quantitative analysis. I believe that it would be better to establish the VIC based on a truly independent study, but I have fewer concerns about the near-term calculations than I do about the back end of their analysis. And I should add that that is not a concern. A consultant can come up with independent work inside of a process that is less independent in terms of including stakeholders and developing assumptions. My concern is really about the independence of the process, more so than necessarily the independence of the consultant.
Understood. And thank you for that clarification, but let me make sure that I'm clear. LEI did not conclude that Guidehouse had justified its forecast of incremental operating reserves needed to accommodate solar uncertainty, did it?
I would say, and I realize I'm stepping outside the report, I would say we do not believe that they fully justified their conclusions.
Thank you. Turning to the discussion, I think that appeared in your report concerning the applicability of Duke's SISC or Solar Integration Service Charge. In your report, LEI recommends on page 56 of that report, quote, if the commission believes it must set a fixed VIC, LEI concurs with Mr. Ori that DESC's proposed VIC for tranche 1 of $1.80 per megawatt hour may be a reasonable value for all newly contracted resources over the next 2 years and existing contracts with a true-up provision. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Can you explain whether that statement means that what $1.80 per megawatt hour would be fixed or not?
So what I believe we were trying to express there was that if the commission feels constrained by statute to set a fixed VIC, that the $1.80 would be set for any contracts signed within the next 2 years. And that would be for the full 10 years of those contracts. And then in the next proceeding, there would be either access to, hopefully in the next proceeding, there'd be access to the independent study, and that would guide the level of the VIC that would be set for contracts that were signed after that period.
Let me share my screen with you briefly. I want to just make sure that I'm being clear on my question.
Sure.
I am looking at page 56 of the London Economics International LLC report. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Madam Chair, is that visible in the room?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Here's the sentence I'm trying to get clarification on, sir.
Of course.
$1.80 per megawatt hour may be a reasonable value for all newly contracted resources over the next 2 years and existing contracts with a true-up provision. This is just simply a question about English.
Yeah, no,
I'm trying to understand.
I can see where your confusion would and I apologize for interrupting. But I do think I see where the confusion lies, and let me try and clarify. And then if I haven't done a good job, please
go ahead.
Correct me. But the over the 2 years was meant to apply to all contracts signed over the next 2 years. It wasn't meant to set a fixed VIC for a $1.80 for 2 years, because I think doing that and then subjecting it to a reset 2 years later really isn't that different. If there's a statutory requirement that it be fixed, then it's fixed for 10 years. If you can't do an interim 96 cents, then I suspect you would have the same objections to doing a $1.80 for 2 years and resetting it after 2 years. And so the intent of that sentence was that instead of having, tranche 1, tranche 2, tranche 3, et cetera, and different VIC levels, it was, anything that's signed within the next 2 years would have a fixed VIC of a $1.80 for the duration of their contracts. And then 2 years from now, there would be a new VIC level that would be set for contracts that were signed after the next proceeding. So does that help you?
It does. And then the next sentence, the next phrase is existing contracts with a true-up provision. My question is, with the true-up provision mean that you're wanting $1.80 with a true-up? Or are you referring to existing contracts that have a true-up provision?
I'm referring to existing contracts that have a true-up provision.
Thank you. That's the clarification I was looking for, because every time I read it the other way. So I appreciate you clarifying that. LEI, in evaluating this, did not come up with the $1.80 per megawatt hour figure based on its own quantitative analysis, correct?
That's correct. We are capable of doing that quantitative analysis. I think we'll have heard testimony that doing so, even if you don't go through a stakeholdering process, takes 1.5 to 2 months. It takes substantial resources, and neither the time nor the resources were allocated under this engagement. So we felt that the best approach was to develop an opinion based on what we saw from Guidehouse, understanding the ways in which various witnesses were challenging those results. But we felt that to run the modeling independently and do it properly was not something that was within the scope of our engagement.
Okay, but you justify it in your report on page 56 as consistent with the levels established in the Duke 2019 avoided cost proceeding, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that Duke's current integration charge was the result of a settlement agreement?
I am.
And were you aware that that integration charge has never been litigated before this commission?
Yes.
And that the settlement agreement required that an independent technical review committee complete a full analysis of Duke's integration study methodology and create a report that will be filed with this commission. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Are you aware that that report and Duke's integration charge will be litigated for the first time before this commission in 2022?
Yes.
And are you also aware that the Duke settlement agreement approved by this commission explicitly states that the settlement agreement, quote, will not constitute a precedent or evidence of acceptable practice in future proceedings?
Well, I've learned that I should never pretend to be a lawyer. I think my conclusion was based solely from an economic perspective in terms of thinking about the integration charges that are being applied. I fully understand your point that from a legal perspective, it was not intended to be precedent setting.
Okay, let me ask you. Bear with me just one moment.
Of course.
Have you reviewed Duke's integration study?
I'd have to go back and check because sometimes I get my work for the various dockets confused. So I don't want to, I have reviewed a lot of documents. I don't want to either say yes or no without going back and checking the bibliography of both of our reports. But suffice it to say, you know, if I looked at it, it was a brief overview. It was not comprehensive.
Having trouble making a document pop up on my screen here. I hope you'll bear with me.
No problem.
Madam Chair, I'm having a slight technical issue here, and I'm about to start a line of questions that may take a little while longer. Would it be appropriate for me to suggest a short break here since it's 11:35?
Mr. Burns, that's appropriate. I was waiting to see when you were going to switch to another issue and ask for a short break. So now would be a good time. By my clock, it is 11:35. Let's take a 15-minute break. We will return at 11:50.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We are back on the record after a short break. Let's take a roll call of commissioners, please. Here in the hearing room, we have Commissioners Thomas, Commissioner Carol Williams, Commissioner Powers, and Belser. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Caston and Commissioner Irvin. There we go.
Chair, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. We have, let's see, Mr. Goulding is on the stand. And Mr. Burns, Attorney Burns, will resume questioning. Thank you all for
Thank you, Madam
allowing
Chair.
the break.
Just clear. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Everything still good?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Great. Thank you for confirming that. I had a little bit of problem with calling up documents, and I have probably ceded the technology award to Mr. Willoughby again. But I do want to backtrack for just a second and share a document which we've marked as cross-examination Exhibit 18.
Mr. Burns, may I inquire, has that been sent to the parties and the witness?
Yes, ma'am. It was just sent this morning, and it was actually sent at 4:30 on Friday as well.
Okay, thank you.
The copy I'm looking at is not marked as 18, but the one that was distributed was. That was the genesis of my problem, Madam Chair, was I was having trouble calling up the marked copy, but this is the document that we sent. And I'm introducing it as Exhibit 18. It's an electronically filed copy of a partial settlement agreement between, in the Duke Sisk proceeding, Mr. Golding. And I just wanted to, as we discussed earlier, direct your attention on page 6 of that document under paragraph 5. The parties agree. Do you see here, would you read 5B, that the parties agree that signing this settlement agreement, and then B?
Yes, I believe this is what you'd highlighted before, that this will not constitute a precedent or evidence of acceptable practice in future proceedings.
And were you aware of that at the time that you relied on the Duke Sisk as support for your $1.85 or $1.80 figure?
As I said before, my reliance is from an economic perspective in terms of thinking about what's reasonable. I view this as a legal setting. The statement that you've highlighted as being something that is in the realm of the legal profession. For me, as a regulatory economist, I'm concerned with looking at what's reasonable on a regional basis, taking into account values that have been established in other proceedings, taking into account other studies, thinking about the cost of ancillary services in organized markets, and all of those inform thinking about the level of the 180.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. In looking at that then, did LEI analyze Duke's system operations?
No.
Did you analyze anything like the historical operating reserves held by Duke?
We don't believe that analysis would be necessary in order to come to the conclusion that we did, that the $1.80 is within an acceptable range of VIC if and only if the commission decides that it is unable to continue with the interim 96-cent level.
Understood, but to confirm, you really didn't compare the Duke system with the DESC system to determine whether the reimbursement or whether the integration charge would adequately or overcompensate the utility for its operating reserves?
As I've said, we don't believe that level of detail analysis is necessary to support the opinion that we developed.
Okay. Are you aware, sir, that Santee Cooper, in South Carolina state-owned utility, does not have a solar integration charge?
I'll take your word for it.
Did you do any analysis on Santee Cooper's system operations since it's located close by to DESC?
We did not believe that analysis of Santee Cooper's system was necessary to develop our opinion.
But it wouldn't be appropriate for LEI to suggest that because Santee Cooper does not have an integration charge, then Dominion shouldn't either, would it?
I think that what we're trying to do is to assist in developing a reasonable set of outcomes. And there's seldom one perfect exact number that works. We recognize that there are systems in which a number of 0 is used. We recognize as well that in organized markets, as we stated in our report, that generally speaking, intermittent resources do not pay do not pay for the cost of the ancillary services that are used to balance them. We believed and continue to believe that if the commission is unable to continue with an interim VIC of 96 cents, that the $1.80 falls within the range of reasonable potential outcomes.
And one of the reasons you believe that it falls within the range of reasonable potential outcomes is that there's a nearby system that has a $1.80 charge. Is that right?
That's one of the reasons. It's not the only reason. I understand your perspective that that you can point to another system that has 0. We question. I mean, there's a number of issues with the way in which public power systems are operated that are distinct from DESC, so I'm not sure that we would. In fact, I'm sure that we would not support the argument that because Santee Cooper has 0, that that DESC should as well.
According to the Solar Energy Industries Association, Florida is ranked number 3 in the country for installed power. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Solar power.
Yes.
Do you know if Florida has adopted solar integration charges for its utilities?
I'm not aware of solar integration charges in Florida.
And Georgia is ranked number 9 in the country for installed solar, according to the SEIA. Were you aware of that? For installed solar?
Yes.
Do you know if Georgia has adopted solar integration charges for its utilities?
I do not.
All right. Let me draw your attention to the interrogatory responses that you provided in response to CCEVA's requests. Do you see that?
I do.
Does the document you're looking at state on the top responses to first set of interrogatories from Carolina's Clean Energy Business Association?
It does.
Is that legible for you, Madam Chair?
Yes, thank you.
I'd just like to look at these briefly, sir. You made it clear, didn't you, that you considered that LEI's mandate was to review avoided cost methodologies. And I'm looking in the response to number 2. Right here, LEI's mandate is to review avoided cost methodologies and calculations. The VIC is not an avoided cost, but a charge that is applicable to a subset of qualifying facilities. So is it fair to say that you view that it was not within LEI's mandate to determine the VIC?
Yes.
Or to review the VIC?
I believe it was not within LEI's mandate, nor were the resources or time provided to develop an independent calculation for the VIC.
And on, as we asked you, or asked LEI additional questions, we asked whether you reviewed certain CCEVA in question 3. We asked whether you reviewed CCEVA Discovery Quest 214 973 no ink reserves.xlsx, which is a file that was produced by, is a work paper produced by Guidehouse. But we asked if you reviewed that and you responded, please see response 2 above, which was to say that you found that given the extent of contrary evidence, an independent, fully stakeholdered study should be commissioned, and then stated that the review of the VIC was outside of the mandate of LEI, right?
Correct.
And you, in fact, LEI made that same response to all of the remaining questions asked by CCBA, as we asked for details related to your review of Mr. Burgess's work and of Guidehouse's work, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Burgess, though, didn't simply say that there should be no VIC, did he?
Mr. Burgess presented a few alternative calculations, and so while I believe, and I don't want to misquote Mr. Burgess, I believe he said that while he believes he could justify 0, he did present an alternative lower number than 96 cents.
And he also presented several critiques or suggestions to the Guidehouse report that would result in different numbers, but lower than the Guidehouse report, didn't he?
He did.
And among those things was he evaluated it using hourly weighting, which Guidehouse considered and then rejected, correct?
Correct.
So it's not just that Mr. Burgess said we shouldn't have a VIC. Mr. Burgess actually analyzed Guidehouse's work and critiqued it where he believed it was faulty and suggested changes to fix those faults, didn't he?
That's correct. And I think that our position is that we've listed a set of things that we think should be subject to an independent study. We're concerned about going through the series of changes that Mr. Burgess suggested in isolation. And so one of the reasons that we felt strongly that an independent study was necessary was that most modeling exercises are performed using a set of internally consistent assumptions. And while I think that Mr. Burgess, myself, others can engage in a solid peer review of Guidehouse's work and present critiques, it is important that modeling be performed with an internally consistent set of assumptions. And so as we went through and looked at all of the various critiques that Mr. Burgess made, we felt that the best way to approach those was in a fully stakeholder peer-reviewed process, similar to what was performed for the IRP, that would allow the parties to come to a consensus on a set of scenarios and a series of assumptions that are internally consistent. I think you have to be careful about going in and pulling various levers and coming up with a different number without fully examining the impact on all the other assumptions that go into the modeling.
One of those levers, would one of those levers be that you have to be careful and cautious about doing, be importing a VIC figure from another system that has very different circumstances than the one being evaluated here?
So ultimately, as we go through the modeling, the levels of the VIC in other jurisdictions are going to at least provide guidance. I usually think of these things as providing boundaries on the envelope, of providing reasons to question results, to say, why are they different here? Is this system really as different as the results otherwise would indicate. So no, I don't believe that you would throw out all the numbers that come from systems that are outside of the area that's being modeled.
But you didn't actually, or LEI didn't actually do all that analysis of Guidehouse and Mr. Burgess. You determined that it was outside of your mandate and that there was sufficient contrary evidence that you suggested a third study, right?
But we suggested a third study based on our review of the evidence consistent with what we felt our mandate to be.
And Mr. Burgess, in his review of Guidehouse, applied hourly weighting in his calculations, and just that one change reduced the VIC to 73 cents, didn't it?
That was his testimony, correct.
But you did not apply hourly weighting to determine whether or not Mr. Burgess's calculations or Guidehouse's calculations were correct.
We do not believe that performing those individual calculations outside of a fully structured modeling process necessarily produces internal results that are internally consistent.
Okay. Beginning on page, I'm going to change topics now, Mr. Thank you for your testimony there. I appreciate it. On page 56 of the report, and I'll share my screen so we're looking at the same document. Section 5.4, you begin to discuss the mitigation protocol. Is that right?
Correct.
SSVM, which is a term that comes up here at the SVVM mitigation protocol. SVVM is the solar variability metric. Is that right?
Yes.
Is it SVVM or SSVM? Because it's both ways in your report.
Well, I apologize if there's been a typo. Let me.
No, I'm just saying that I may not know, so I just want to make sure. I think it's SSVM.
We have SSVM in our list of acronyms, the solar site variability metric. So okay. I apologize if there was there appears to have been a typo there.
Mr. Golding, I have certainly filed things that had misspellings in it. That's not a critique. I just want to make sure that we were talking about the same thing. That's all.
No, I appreciate the clarification.
You begin with a discussion of Mr. Burgess's critique of DEC's mitigation protocol calculation methodology. Is that right? CC witness Mr. Burgess raises several issues related to the mitigation protocol, which LEI discusses in the subsections below.
Correct.
Right? Is that correct?
Yes,
so then
correct.
You turn to looking at the four issues that Mr. Burgess evaluated. The first is that DESC's SSVM should compare the facility's output to the forecasted production, not to the production the hour before, which is what Dominion did. Is that right?
Correct.
Then he suggests that that the SSVM should capture hours with the greatest potential for a megawatt drop in energy production rather than the greatest percentage drop, because the percentage-based approach overly weights morning and evening hours when solar production is relatively low. So you evaluated that. And you said that Mr. Burgess recommended that Dominion should use an average, not a maximum SSVM, to evaluate whether a facility can avoid integration charges, correct? So you looked at that.
So I want to be careful about the word evaluated, because I think I would say reviewed.
Okay.
But our purpose as we put together this report was to make it as useful as possible for somebody thinking about the proceeding, and therefore we attempted to fairly summarize the concerns of each of the parties before we discussed our own conclusions.
Okay. And you evaluated or you reviewed his fourth issue, which is that, and you quoted as, the SSVM metric should not necessarily be determined based on a single solar installation, but should be an individual site's contribution to any fleet-wide drops in solar production. So on each of those four issues raised by Mr. Burgess, and when you look at your conclusions, in the report, you actually agree with those critiques of Dominion's mitigation protocol, don't you?
I believe that we ultimately recommended adopting 1 and 4.
All right. Mr. Burgess goes on to note that rather than rely on this relatively flawed framework, meaning the Guidehouse framework or Dominion's framework, I believe a better approach would be for Dominion to use the mitigation protocol Dominion developed for North Carolina as a starting point for South Carolina, correct?
Yes.
And then he made further suggested modifications to the North Carolina approach.
Correct.
And you ultimately, in your opinion, you side with Mr. Bell, but you say, and let me get down to your actual opinion. LEI agrees with Dominion's proposed mitigation protocol and SSVM calculation as long as the modifications which Mr. Bell noted in his rebuttal testimony are incorporated. And those that you noted in his rebuttal testimony are the same as at least number 1 and number 4 introduced by Mr. Burgess, right?
Correct.
So you agree then that Dominion's SSVM methodology should have compared forecast to actual and not actual to the prior hour, correct?
What we agree is that the forecast is a better approach. I think sometimes we're not trying to say one party should have started someplace, but rather that their starting point can be improved upon. And we believe that Mr. Burgess's proposal was an improvement.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burgess proposed he proposed 4, and Mr. Bell agreed with 1 and 4. He proposed those things and was correct on those. And he also proposed using as a starting point the methodology Dominion uses in North Carolina, didn't he?
He did.
Did you look into the methodology used in North Carolina by Dominion?
We reviewed it and we felt that our recommendations were sufficient for this particular proceeding.
But you didn't discuss North Carolina's methodology at all in your report. You just mentioned that Mr. Burgess referred to it in this paragraph, correct?
That's correct.
So the commission, if it relies on the LEI report, would not know whether the North Carolina methodology that Dominion already uses in one of its jurisdictions would accommodate or build upon Mr. Burgess's concerns.
Sorry, the reason that I'm hesitating here is because the commission has our report in front of them. I believe they have Mr. Burgess's report as well. We have made our recommendation. I think obviously I would never presume to speak for the commissioners or to exclude them from looking at other pieces of evidence. We reviewed a great deal of material in this particular proceeding, and we came to our recommendation. If the commission believes that Mr. Burgess's submission with regards to North Carolina better meets the needs of South Carolinians than our recommendation, then that's certainly something that they could, that's certainly a conclusion that they could come to.
And it's Mr. Burgess who has evaluated North Carolina's or Dominion's protocol in North Carolina and amended it to comply with the needs of South Carolina, at least has suggested such a protocol in this docket, correct?
Yes, he has.
Okay. Additionally, Dominion proposed that QFs would install a revenue quality meter, the integration meter, capable of recording 5-minute energy production data for a facility's AC production. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Mr. Burgess testified that normal production meters could be used in lieu of a new meter, right?
Yes, he did.
And you agree, stating in that your report recommends that to the extent the production meter can provide the necessary data, this meter should be used for the SSVM calculation and an additional integration meter should not be required. And that's on page 59 of your report. Hope I don't make anyone dizzy here. Right here, correct?
Yes.
All right. On what's called the two-strike provision, Dominion proposes that QFs be unable to use the mitigation protocol to avoid integration charges if they fail to submit SSVM data for 2 consecutive months, correct?
Correct.
But you agree with Mr. Burgess's view that the two-strike disqualification provision is potentially too onerous because it prevents a QF from being able to use the mitigation protocol for the remainder of its PPA term in the event that it misses 2 months of reporting, right?
Yes.
And you also noted that the proposed two-strike disqualification provision could actually potentially harm customers because QFs that are disqualified from eligibility for mitigation and thus unable to reduce their monthly VIC would no longer have an incentive to avoid unexpected variations in their output. Is that right?
Yes.
So you agree with Mr. Burgess on that as well?
Yes.
And you recommend that the commission reject this element of Dominion's proposed mitigation protocol, don't you?
Yes.
Thank you. Now let's turn briefly to, I'm going to stop sharing so we can just talk. You agreed that Act 62 requires that the commission, quote, ensure the non-discriminatory treatment of small power producers, right?
Yes.
And that Act 62 includes, among other things, ensuring that power purchase agreements, including terms and conditions, are commercially reasonable, right?
Yes.
I probably should have kept sharing, sorry. On page 60 of your report, and I just want to show you that I'm on page 60. See that?
I do.
Okay. You state that while not defined in the statute, and let me find this, although the term commercially reasonable is not explicitly defined in the statute, London Economics Inc. takes the term commercially reasonable to mean terms should be, quote, fair and done in good faith and correspond to commonly accepted commercial practices, right?
Correct.
On the insurance coverage amounts that are suggested by Dominion, they propose increasing the insurance coverage amounts for QFs regardless of the technology used by the QF, don't they?
Yes.
And the proposed increased insurance requirements, they're not scaled to the size of the facility, are they?
No.
And they're not determined by what technology is present, such as storage at the facility, are they?
No.
Mr. Levitas, who did you hear Mr. Levitas's testimony at the earlier hearings? Did you review it?
I would have reviewed it, yes.
Thank you. He testified there was no basis provided other than corporate preference to increase the coverage amounts. Did you recall that testimony?
I do.
And LEI states in its report that LEI is not convinced that the proposed changes are necessary to protect consumers, and that's on page 64. You'll bear with me, I'm going to scan down there. Insurance coverage amounts. While LEI is not convinced that the proposed changes are necessary to protect customers, we recognize that the proposed coverage levels are generally obtainable in the marketplace. Isn't it important to know whether the proposed changes are necessary to protect customers before they are mandated upon QFs?
So our approach here is to look at proposals and try to determine the appropriate balance between protecting consumers, allowing the company to run an efficient operation, and not placing undue barriers on QFs. And so as we looked at this, we said, well, if the company's proposing something that is clearly not available in the marketplace, and insurance markets do change from year to year. But if they're proposing something that is clearly not available, then that's a barrier to QFs. But if they're proposing something that is commercially available, then I'm not convinced that it is unreasonable if it also leads to more efficient operations. Obviously, I'm not convinced that, referring to the corporate wisdom of the head office, is a justification for doing anything in a particular procedure, or proceeding. But what we're trying to do here is to say, well, overall, if the company is able to run more efficiently by standardizing some of its documents, and doing so doesn't unduly harm QFs, then we don't think that's unreasonable. And so that's where we've come to in this particular opinion.
Understood. But let's say that I'm going to drive Uber with my car. I better have good insurance to protect the people that will be in the back of my car. But I don't need pilot's insurance, even though I can obtain pilot's insurance on the marketplace, right?
I would certainly agree with that, yes.
It would be a undue burden upon me to require me to have pilot's insurance to drive Uber, wouldn't it?
I'm not, while I appreciate the analogy, I think that it's probably somewhat fraught, because what was being asked wasn't necessarily coming from a different industry. It wasn't something that was completely unrelated to the current business.
But it is being asked without being tailored to the needs of the individual facilities. We've already confirmed that earlier in your testimony. It's not tailored by technology, it's not tailored by risk, and it's not tailored by the value or the size of the facility.
Correct. And I think our biggest concern was in terms of the scalability, and that's why we bifurcated our recommendation.
Understood. Other changes, thank you for that. Other changes that are suggested by Dominion are to the surety bond, and Dominion proposes substantial modifications to its form of surety bond to, quote, conform with Dominion Energy Inc.'s form for such bond. Do you recall that?
Yes.
One change is the waiver of surety defenses, correct?
Yes.
The current surety bond form does not require a surety to waive legal defenses to payment that it is otherwise entitled to assert, but Dominion proposes to require a surety in advance to waive all rights and defenses, counterclaims, set-offs, cross-claims, or any other claim that surety or principal may have. Do you recall that difference in the form?
Yes.
LEI states that modifying forms to conform with a parent company practice is not sufficient justification for making a change, but should instead respond to a material risk to customers before being proposed. That's on page 66 of your report, correct?
Yes.
Did LEI find any basis to conclude that there have been any changes in material risk to customers in this proceeding that would justify the proposed changes to the surety bond to the extent of requiring waiver of surety defenses in advance?
No.
In your report, you state on page 66 that you accept that proposed change because, quote, we do not believe the QF developers would be significantly harmed in this instance, right?
Yes.
But you heard Mr. Levitas, who works for a QF developer and has tremendous experience in the industry, testify under oath that these changes proposed to conform to Dominion's corporate practice will likely dissuade sureties from issuing a bond in favor of a QF. Did you hear that testimony?
The problem with that testimony is it's just not consistent with my experience. And, as somebody that has reviewed surety bonds, that has obtained them for various businesses, I've seen the language that is being proposed here. And so I did not feel that I could say that what was being asked for was unreasonable. And that was the basis of my conclusion.
So you didn't feel it was unreasonable, despite the fact that you've confirmed that this change was not justified in response to any material impact on customers or consumers,
So
or any risk.
I want to reiterate the balance that I'm trying to achieve here, which is that if we are recommending something that, albeit extremely marginally, increases costs for the company in terms of having non-standard forms, that those costs are ultimately passed on to customers. And if we don't feel that the change is going to impose an undue barrier to entry, then we are inclined to accept them. But again, to point out that the company should be justifying the change in terms of benefits to customers, not convenience.
Well, that's where I wanted to go, and I'm showing you again page 66 of your report and your LEI's opinion of DESC's proposed changes to the standard offer form PPA form of surety bond. Sentence number 2, changes should instead respond to a material risk to customers before being proposed. Correct?
Yes.
But that didn't happen here. With this proposal, you've moved on and said, well, it's okay because it's out. I've seen it before, but you haven't identified, nor has Dominion identified, a material risk to which they are responding by proposing this change to the surety form, have they?
Correct.
Thank you. Dominion also seeks to change 2 items in the NOC form regarding site control. Are you with me on that?
Yes. Yes.
First, it would add an item to require that the seller, and this would be item 4 sub 3, or 3 little i's, to require that the seller show it has, quote, taken meaningful steps to obtain site control of the project site adequate to commence construction of the facility, close quote. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And it seeks to modify the language in item 4 sub 4
Madam Vice
to
Chair.
require. Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. You jumped over to the knock thing, and I'm trying to follow the pages.
I apologize.
Tell me where you are.
Well, I'm just talking about the knock, but I'll pull up a document that may help.
Well, we've got the document. I was on page 66 and was trying.
Yep, at the bottom of page 66, okay, Commissioner, it's 6.3 knock form.
Okay, thank you.
And let me get down to the right section here before I. And then if you look at page 68, that's where this starts to get discussed. Site control certification is one of the bolded and bulleted points.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Please interrupt me when I do that. So they seek to add item 4. Let me share this so we're looking at the same thing, sir. Oops, that's the wrong screen. Just as I thought I was rolling, I shared the wrong screen. So DESC seeks to add item 4 sub 3 to the list of certifications in the knock form, which is proposed to read, seller has taken meaningful steps to obtain site control of the project site adequate to commence construction of the facility, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then in 4 sub 4, discussed in the next bullet, Dominion seeks to modify that language to require documentation that, quote, seller has secured or has submitted all applications and filing fees necessary to secure all local permitting and zoning approvals for the project site necessary to commence construction of the facility. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Levitas testified that these changes are onerous because they would require construction-related information which is unlikely to be available in the early stages of a project when establishing a legally enforceable obligation to sell the output to the utility. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
But you believe, at least on page 69, that the original language pertaining to site controls should be maintained, and thus the changes proposed by Dominion should be rejected, correct?
Yes.
You note that the existing language was approved by the commission in the 2019 avoided cost proceeding and was thus deemed already to be commercially reasonable, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you note that the existing language aligns exactly with the language in the NOC form approved in the equivalent 2019 avoided cost proceeding for the two Duke subsidiaries as well, right?
Yes.
Your report states that with regards to requiring proof that the QF has secured or applied for all local permitting and zoning approvals necessary to commence construction, that there is no similar requirement included in the NOC form for the two Duke entities.
Correct.
Right? Let me see if I can find exactly where that is. Nope, that's it. It's up here. Here it is. The last paragraph on page 68. Your report agrees with Mr. Levitus's observation that securing permits and approvals is a condition for achieving commercial operation as dictated in Dominion's standard offer and form PPA, right?
Yes.
And LEI believes this requirement is best addressed in the standard offer form PPA, where it is already included, and as such does not need to be included as a condition to execute the NOC form and achieve a legally enforceable obligation, correct?
Yes.
So overall, you see no compelling reason to adopt the changes proposed by Dominion, and you conclude that the existing language regarding site control approved in the 2019 avoided cost proceeding strikes a reasonable balance between protecting customers by ensuring QFs demonstrate a sufficient commitment to seeing their project through to completion while not subjecting QFs to unreasonably onerous requirements. Correct?
Yes.
That's down here on page 69 in the last paragraph in the blue area for the commissioner's reference. Is that all correct? Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. If you'll bear with me for just 1 second, I may be finished, but I'd like to look over my notes briefly. I believe that's all I have at this time, and I'll tender the witness. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. It is 12:35, and I think we're getting to a point where a good point to break for lunch. Therefore, we're going to break for lunch and return at 1:55. 1:55. Thank you. Have a good lunch.